Hey guys, what's up? Today I'll be ranking all the Shin Megami Tensei but also the Persona series all together from worst to best. Of course, I'm only going to focus on the ones that got a North American release, and as always, only the RPGs, not the fighting spin-offs or the adventure games or the mobile games. As always, remember this is my own personal opinion, and with that clarified, let's begin! The worst on the list is definitely Revelations Persona. Yes, I think the first Persona game is the worst SMT ever, an absolute wreck of a game. Not even for its time was it good, being already slow, clunky, outdated and completely tedious. Had horrible dungeon design, high encounter rate, annoyingly slow battles, lame interface and, well, at least it had a great story. It was intriguing to see a bunch of students caught up in some real dark stuff there. A remaster was there on the PSP that fixed some issues, for example making the battles go faster, improved interface and better navigation. Unfortunately, the high encounter rate did not go away, nor did its confusing first-person dungeons. Either version is the worst game in this list, but if you care enough, go for the PSP remake for a decent experience at least. Next up is Demi Kids Light and Dark. Unlike Persona, this is actually a pretty fun game, although it's very ironic that it was inspired by Pokemon. I say ironic because SMT was doing monster recruitment since way before Pokemon, but this one is basically SMT for kids, so I get it. They were released during the Pokemon hype worldwide, so Atlus wanted to have their own versions of that. Dark and Light are part of the Devil Children series, all of them released exclusive to Japan. So we got these two, and they're about demon recruitment, fusion and training. Just simplified for a very young audience. Like I said, they're fun games but not something I'd like to finish one day. In my opinion, Shin Megami Tensei for kids just doesn't work. It's not really a franchise that makes sense on E ratings. Coming up is Revelations the Demon's Lair. This is one of the games we did get in North America, not in Europe, that most people don't know about, and it's a regular SMT turn-based RPG but in a magical world rather than a post-apocalyptic one. It follows the quest of L, a student trying to learn magic to help in a world full of demons. It's part of a small series of spin-offs called Last Bible, but this is the only one localized outside of Japan. Is it any good? Yeah, it's decent, but it's only alright. Once again, it was kind of developed for kids, not as infantile as the Demi Kids games, but still. Gameplay-wise, it was also simplified so younger gamers could easily understand and get into the series. Look, I like the fact that Atlus took their time to develop these types of games trying to appeal to younger audiences. I respect that. I'm just not a fan of the idea of turning a mature-rated, overly dark and philosophical series that questions religion in a bunch of little spin-offs for children. Next is Strange Journey. Finally, from now on, all the great ones are here. Pure gold. Well, silver for Strange Journey, but let me explain why. I think this game was very original, being one of the very few games in the series that's science fiction. Here you follow a mature group of soldiers who are sent to the Antarctica to investigate some bizarre events. That's right, not a game where your MC is a high school student. The story here is top-notch and I believe it to be one of the best in the series. Unfortunately, it's the gameplay that makes me rank it this low on the list. I think combat is just as great as in any SMT games, no quarter with that, but this is a dungeon crawler in first person with the longest, and I mean the longest labyrinths in the entire series. Imagine traversing through large areas full of puzzles, dead ends, teleportation spells, and on top of it all, random encounters, a lot of them. A remake on the 3DS was there, but it didn't fix any of these issues, it just made the game's interface better, so it's not as annoying as the original version. It's still a great game nonetheless. Next up is Persona 2 Eternal Punishment. Curiously though, Eternal Punishment's PSP release never made it overseas. This is a much better game than the first Persona. Story-wise it's connected to it, but almost unrelated and standalone. However, it's a direct sequel to Innocent Sin, so you might want to play the other game in the duology first. I think story, characters and music are fantastic here, and I guess the graphics were acceptable for their time, but this game begs for a modern remake for a few number of reasons. Combat is good, yeah, better than in the first Persona, but it's still kinda slow with menus that feel clunky and look severely outdated. I think navigation was done right this time, but maneuvering the camera can be also tricky sometimes. As a result, you get lost often also because the area design isn't all that great either. Random encounters make all of these issues worse. It's still 100% worth playing because the positives easily outmatch the negatives here. And obviously next is Innocent Sin. So this is the first one in the duology. Contrary to Eternal Punishment, we never got its original PS1 release, but we did get its PSP remaster. I actually played both versions because the original has been fan-translated since forever. I prefer the PSP version because it's more playable and enjoyable for me, although it barely fixed any issues whatsoever, the same issues I mentioned in Eternal Punishment. Why I prefer this one over that one is pretty simple. The music. It feels more rock and metal for the most part, as opposed to the other games' more electronic vibes, but in terms of story, combat and the overall gameplay, I'm not sure which one is better. They share some of the same characters and follow the same events connected all together, so yeah, music is what made me rank it higher. Moving on to Persona Q2. Etrian Odyssey is a series of dungeon crawlers in first person where the goal is to explore large maps. You use the stylus to pinpoint locations, doors, treasures, items, clues, etc. The series got some success overseas, but it was a major hit in Japan. Since Atlus had a lot of experience with these types of games already, they decided to milk the Persona success and make 2 spin-offs. This one is mostly focused on the Persona 5 cast, but it crosses over again in a non-canon adventure with the cast of Persona 3 and 4. The game's great, and that's coming from a guy who doesn't like Etrian Odyssey, but I'm a big Persona fan, so there you go. Its only problem is that it has some real nasty difficulty spikes with some enemies and bosses, though I guess it's also worth mentioning that regular battles can take up forever, even on the easiest difficulty settings. It's worth playing if you like Persona a lot, like me, and if you love Etrian Odyssey too, you'll have a blast. The next one is the first one, Persona Q. I'm ranking the first game higher for one simple reason: it does not have the obnoxious spikes its sequel has. Seriously, the sequel just feels very unbalanced even on easy mode. The original was still a little bit like this too, but not as much. A highlight the sequel has is the cast of Persona 5, so you have one crossover with 3 games. Here it's only Persona 3 and 4, but that's okay. So like I mentioned, both games play like Etrian Odyssey. You go into dungeons full of puzzles, point out things in your map on the bottom screen, fight battles, outrun powerful elite monsters and fight a boss, all in turn-based battles with up to 5 active party members. I'm thankful the encounter rate in them is nowhere near as high as in any other games in this series. That alone made solving the puzzles and the navigation much less stressful. Next is Shin Megami Tensei 4. SMT 4 is not among my favorites in the series because I don't like it when games force you to do side quests. Making me go to the same dungeons over and over again wasn't fun for me. I think, however, that everything else is phenomenal. Again, we meet a mature cast with interesting and well-developed characters, the classic neutral law and chaos roots in a greatly written story, and I'm a die-hard fan of the soundtrack. Both SMT 4 games have the best music in the entire series for my taste. Moving on to Rydo Kusanoja vs the Soulless Army. Nowadays, when a JRPG franchise goes the action route, everyone's feathers are ruffled. In this case, I'm not sure what made Atlus go that way, but only with this specific duology. I like trying something different every time, so it didn't bother me. Especially not since this was actually the very first SMT game I ever played in my life. I like that it takes place in the Taisho period of Japan, between 1912 and 1926. I love Rydo's design and his companion Gocho the cat, both investigating paranormal events in Tokyo. Combat was great for its time, responsive, intuitive, with decent controls. You always control Rydo, but you can summon one demon you either captured or fused before to aid you in battle. Great game here. Moving on to its sequel, Rydo Kusanoja vs King Abaddon. The direct sequel is ranked higher merely because it's slightly improved combat. You could now summon two demons in battle, and instead of capturing them, recruitment and negotiation shenanigans were back. I usually rank these two games together for the aforementioned reasons. I just like this one a little bit more. Yes, you need to play the first game first, as this is a direct sequel to it, but the cases and investigations are based on a new conflict this time. Anyway, you can't go wrong with either game. Next on the list, Digital Devil Saga 1 and 2. Unlike the Rydo games, I'm ranking these two together. After all, the second wouldn't exist at all without the first one. They were planned to be released this way back in the day, where other publishers like Namco were doing the same with games like Saga or Dot Hack. Digital Devil Saga was never meant to be just one game, and its direct sequel, which is pretty much Volume 2, was released soon afterwards. I think this game has one of the most interesting and disturbing settings in the series, with perhaps the most intriguing plotlines. Hey, you play as characters transforming into demons here, but because of that, there's no demon recruitment, fusion or negotiation, at least not in the traditional way. Plus, the dungeon design and their puzzles can easily make you throw the controller to the screen quite often. But it's a great duology nonetheless, with awesome music, by the way. Next is Persona 5 Strikers. If you think this is yet another spin-off, you might be wrong. This is actually a direct sequel to the original Persona 5, and yes, it's canon, but it's an action RPG co-developed by Omega Force. It feels like every JRPG series nowadays needs to have its own warrior-style game. Strikers, also known as Scramble in Japan, doesn't quite feel that way though. Sure, you do beat 'em up through hordes of demons, even summoning your persona, which pauses the menu. However, you also visit towns, talk to people, watch a lot of cutscenes, read a lot, level up, buy and sell items, customize equipment, capture personas, fuse them. It feels like an action RPG to me, honestly, and that's why it's great, especially if you're a fan of Persona 5. Moving on to Devil Summoner, Soul Hackers. Originally released on the Sega Saturn, we only got its 3DS remaster. I've said I'm not the biggest dungeon crawler fan, but I usually make an exception for SMT games. I was only supposed to test this game to see if it worked, and 2 hours later I was still playing it. I got caught up with the cast, the story, its modern, slightly science fiction world, and like many of you, with Nemisa. She was in perfect contrast with Hitomi's personality, and that's what made her work that much on people. No press turn system here, and the combat therefore isn't as fun as in other SMT games. You select everyone's action first and hope for the best. I like it, but I prefer the original combat. Either way, this is a phenomenal game that I often recommend in this channel. Let's hope the sequel can live up to it, cause it looks like it's gonna be way different. Alright, now we've got Persona 4. I remember going to a store in a mall that had a bunch of rare PS2 games, Persona 4 being pretty much obscure in Mexico back in the day. I got this and others that were in Japanese. Well, this was the only one in English, so I played it and greatly enjoyed it. I was already a fan of the series thanks to Persona 3, so I had expectations for this one that were not disappointed. This is an excellent game that obviously plays better on the Vita, but I've only finished the original version, and that speaks a lot. Moving on to Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne. Nocturne is a game I always resented back on the PS2 because of Matador. I never defeated the bastard no matter how hard I tried, so I ditched the game. I finally beat him recently on the PS4 and couldn't stop playing the game until I beat it. I knew I was gonna love it to pieces when I first played it on the PS2, which is the reason why I was so frustrated by Matador. I love the characters, the story, the combat, abusing debuffs and buffs, the themes, the different routes and ending options other than the classics. I got the freedom route in the end because I'm a Yuko fan, so I aimed for it the whole game. I did save on a separate file to get the true demon ending later, but I probably never will. Wanna know why? Because I hate the freaking dungeons in this game! Encounter rate is so high if you play on normal or hard, so by using merciful mode, it greatly goes down and makes things easier, but I strongly suggest that if you're gonna use it, change it back to normal or hard for the bosses. Merciful is far too easy and not fun to play, honestly, but at least it served its purpose, even for grinding. However, nothing can take away the unnerving plethora of puzzles, dead ends, empty rooms, and being teleported all over the place. I don't even want to talk about the final dungeon or the Amala labyrinth. And that's my little rant. But I still greatly enjoyed this game, and man, the music, man! Let's talk about Persona 5 now. But what else is there to say of the game that made Atlus rich that hasn't already been said? I'm ranking the original version, not the Royal that I haven't even played. It sure sounds like it's the best one out there, but I don't think it would make me rank it higher if I played it, because overall, this is an excellent RPG and one of the longest I've ever played in my life. Plus, Makoto. Enough said. Next is Devil Survivor 2. You guys know I'm a strategy RPG guy, so my boy Devil Survivor 2 had to be this high. I've always had mixed feelings about the cast of characters, some being great, but most of them generic, tropey, and dumb as hell. Literally the only reason why I'm not ranking it higher, cause everything else is phenomenal. Story, music, combat, and every possible route and ending you can get influenced by your decisions. That's why I love Shin Megami Tensei, because they're all true role-playing games where your choices in dialogue actually matter. Next is Shin Megami Tensei 5. I'll be honest, my expectations for this game were as low as you can imagine, so I'm glad I set the bar too low because it surpassed every single one of them. I think the story could have used some more work, including the characters, but I have no real complaints there. No more random encounters, no more horrible puzzles with teleportations. You could just run around and do what you had to do without these nuances. Sure, there were still some puzzles in dungeons and you could get lost, but it was alright. I love the combat as well as the improved interface with the controls. This game is a masterpiece among the best SMT titles ever made, in my opinion. Next is Shin Megami Tensei 4 Apocalypse. Apocalypse is pretty much Shin Megami Tensei meets Persona. It's a supreme combination of both, despite not including same elements or whatever. It's just that the cast here felt more on the Persona design, most of them being with your character almost everywhere he went, which meant getting a strong development through the classic power of friendship. On the SMT side though, you still had an overly dark story with some controversial religious themes and their various philosophies clashing, plus having a demon psychopath pulling your strings half of the time made it way more interesting. Another masterpiece in the series with my favorite soundtrack ever so far. Next is Persona 3. This is the first Persona game I played, but I don't think my nostalgia for it is what made me rank it this high. Persona 3 is very influential. Several JRPGs have tried to emulate some of its ideas, or were clearly inspired by it. Without this game, there will be no Persona 4 or 5, two games that will probably be number one for a lot of you. This one needed to succeed in order to push the franchise into commercial success, and it accomplished that precisely for being revolutionary, knowing too well how to mix a turn-based RPG with a life simulator. And number 1, Jack Bros for the Virtual Boy. Nah, I'm just kidding, I haven't even played it, and I don't think it's an RPG at all. Real number 1 is Devil Survivor Overclocked. In this game, half of the cast was annoying, but the other half was stellar. Thank goodness most of the roots and endings involve those secondary characters. They made the whole game for me. The mix of strategy with turn-based was genius. A genius conceived by the masters that are Careersoft, original developers of Landgreaser and Growlancer. Small locations with your 4 characters moving on grids, each with their own dual pack of demons. It's just amazing. The story and music are killers here. What a way to portray the truth about humanity in times of global distress. This is my favorite Megami Tensei game of all time.